Sotah Daf Yudalid continues the Gemara's discussion about the burial of Moshe Rabbeinu. It then moves into a discussion about the Kosnos Or of Adam Rishon. Then we'll conclude the first part of the Masechta and begin the second, which continues discussing the procedure of the Sotah Karbonos, where we'll again go into Agadata. So let's begin. The Gemara has been discussing the burial place of Moshe Rabbeinu. The Gemara says nobody knows where it was. Now the Gemara quotes Rechama Bar Chanina, says even Moshe Rabbeinu himself did not know where it was. The pasuk says that lo yoda ish es kvuraso, and ish refers to Moshe Rabbeinu, like this was a bracha asher berech Moshe ish like him. Now we have a few other mamarim of Rav Chama bar Chanina. Why is it that Moshe was buried close to base Pa'ar? That is to atone for the sin of Pa'ar, which Klal Yisrael did in the area of Shittim. Rabbi, he also said, what is meant by Achar Hashem Lakecha Teilechu? You should go after Hashem. How can you possibly follow after the Shechina? The Shechina is a burning fire. But it means to follow in his ways, just like he clothed the naked, like it says, V'yas Hashem l'kim la'adam l'ishto kasnos ar, and he dressed them. We should also give clothing to those who don't have. Just like he visits the sick, like it says, V'yer elov Hashem ba'elon emamrei, we should also visit the sick. And just like he consoles the mourners, like it says, V'yachar yemos Avram v'yavarch elehim es Yitzchak beno, that Kadosh Baruch Hu went and blessed and consoled Yitzchak after the death of Avram, we should also console the mourners. Now, the final thing is that he buries the dead, which we see from Vayikbar also by Guy, that he buried Moshe, and therefore we should also take care to bury the dead. The Gemara now moves on to discuss the Kosnos Or, the clothing of skin of Or that were made for Adam Rishon after the Chet of Eitzadas. The Gemara wants to know, what is Or? What are these clothing of Or? So it's Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. One says it refers to flax, linen, which is soft and worn on the skin, and it's called Or because the skin has pleasure from its feeling. The other one says it refers to wool clothing, which comes from the skin of an animal, and that's why it's called Kosnos Or, which grows out of the skin, but it's not leather according to all opinions. Now the Gemara brings a drasha of Rav Simloi. The Torah begins with Chesed and it ends with Chesed. It begins with Chesed discussing the clothing which was made for Adam and his wife. It ends with Chesed discussing the burial of Moshe Rabbeinu. Says Rabbi Simloi, another drasha. Why is it that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to go into Eretz Yisrael? Did he need to eat its fruits? Did he need to be full from its goodness? No. This is what he said. There are many mitzvahs that you can only do in Eretz Yisrael. I want to go into Eretz Yisrael so that I'll be able to fulfill those mitzvahs myself. And Kadosh Baruch Hu said, the only reason you want to do them is to be Mekabel Schar. I consider it as if you had done them, and I'll give you the Schar as if you had done them. And that's what the pasuk says. Lochein. It's a pasuk in Yeshaya. Lochein achalik lo barabim. V'satzumim michalik shalo. Tachas asher he'era lama v'snasha v'sposhim nimna v'hu chet rabim. Nasa v'laposhim yevgiya. So the Gemara explains this line by line. Lochein achalik shalo. The Gemara says that means I will divide up the loot. That means I'm going to give out schar to v'satzumim yichalik shalo. I'm going to give it out to the strong ones. What does that mean, to the strong ones? Like the strong ones. Which strong ones? So you may think it refers to the most recent ones, not the great ones, the early ones, like Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That's why it says Es Hatzumim, really the great ones, like them, those that are utzum, those that are powerful in Torah and mitzvos. Tachas Shehera Lamavas Nafsho, he poured out his soul to death. That means that he gave his soul over to death, like he said, you're not going to forgive Klal Yisrael, erase me. Then, as Poshem Nimna, he's counted with the sinners. That's because he's counted as one of the ones who died in the Midbar, just like all the ones who sinned with the Meraglim. Then it says, V'hu ched rabim nasa, that he bore the sins of the many. That refers to the fact that he atoned for the chet ha'egel. That means that he's mispalel, he davened for the sinners, because he asked Rachmanas for the sinners of Klal Yisrael, they should do tshuva. Pegim means tefillah, like it says, V'ata al tispala ba'ada amazev al tisa ba'adam rina v'tifla v'al v'tefillah v'al tifgabi. So tifga again means tefillah. This concludes the first parak of the Masechta. Now we begin the second. The parak begins with the Mishnah describing the carbon of the Sotah. So it says that you bring the carbon mincha in a special basket that's made of fronds of a tree, the fibers that go around the tree. It's called a kfifa mitzris. The husband would bring them and he would put it on her hands and she would hold it, and that's in order to wear her down, to wear down her resistance so that she would admit. The most carbon menachos are brought in the beginning of the Kli Shares, and they are Ultimately, in a kli sharis, this one doesn't start in a kli sharis. This one starts in the basket, the kfifa mitzvahs. In the end, it's moved into a kli sharis. Most menachos require oil and levona spice. This one does not require oil or levona spice, as the Torah says explicitly not to put on them. Most menachos come from wheat. This one comes from barley. And although the korban omer comes from barley as well, that is finely ground and sifted, called geresh. This is from kemach, which is much coarser. Gamliel says the reason why this is true is because she acted, or is accused of acting, like an animal, and therefore she brings a korban, which is animal food, like the coarse barley. The Gemara begins with a brisa. What is the reason that we want to wear her out so much? Says Abba Chanan, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, in order that she should become tired, wear down her resistance, and she should backtrack, she should admit. Says the brisa, if the Torah had so much rachmanas on someone who violated his will, that is, someone we want her to admit, that would be someone who had been guilty, who did the avera, and instead of them receiving the punishment, we want them to be saved by admitting. And yet, so we have so much rachmanas for them, certainly those who fulfill as well how much Rahmanas HaKadosh Baruch Hu will have on them. So the Brisa asks, how do you know that it's because of Rahmanas? Maybe it's in order to prevent the Megillah, the scroll, from being erased into the water, which would include the erasure of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name. On that, the Gemara answers that this Brisa is of the opinion that the korban mincha is actually brought after she drinks the water. So it's after the water is prepared and the name is already erased. There is a machlokas about that, whether the korban is brought before the drinking, before the creation of the water, or after. This one holds that it's brought after, and therefore there cannot possibly be an explanation. We're trying to avoid the erasure of the name, because by the time we're doing this, it's already happened. Next, the Gemara discusses that which we said in the Mishnah, that the korban mincha of the Sotah is brought in a basket, and it said that all the other korbanos mincha are brought in kli sharis. So the Gemara has a lengthy Mishnah which contradicts this, because in the Mishnah it describes that korbanos mincha are brought in personal kingdom, not in kli sharis. So the Gemara will bring the lengthy Mishnah and then address that question, and then we'll discuss the Mishnah bit by bit and understand the procedure of korbanos mincha. So the Mishnah says as follows: when a person brings a korban mincha, he brings it in silver and gold containers or baskets made of woven metal, similar to a basket, Rashi says, and that's of course going to be where Akash is from, because it's clear that he's not bringing it in kli sharis. And he brings it to the base of English, it says, and he puts it in a kli sharis, and when he puts it in a kli sharis, it becomes kodesh, it becomes sanctified as a korban. Then he puts on it oil and levona spice, and he brings it to the Kohen. The Kohen takes it to the mizbeach, brings it to the southwestern corner by the horn, that is the corner that sticks up, and that's enough. The Gemara will explain what does it mean by that's enough. In it, he moves the levona to the side, and he takes a kometz. He takes 3 fingers full, the 3 middle fingers full from the mincha, and that's like the shechita. It's parallel to the shechita of an animal. He takes it from the place where there's a lot of oil. The oil is well soaked in it, and he puts that in a kli sharis, a second kli sharis, and then he's mekadesh that in the kli sharis. Then he scoops up some levona and he puts it on top of it. Then he goes up to the mizbech and he puts it and he burns it on the kli sharis, and he salts it. In the kli sharis, he puts it on top of the fire. Then once the kometz is put in the fire, then the rest of it can be eaten, just like shechita of a korban and the hakrava of the dam. And the kahanim are allowed to put wine, oil, or honey into the mincha as they wish in order to eat it. The only thing that they can't do is let it become chametz. That's the mission. The Gemara now says, we learned in here that he brings it in baskets of silver and gold. Clearly it's not kli sharis. So how can our Mishnah say that all other menachas were only brought in kli sharis? So our Papa answers, he says it has to be a kli which is fitting to be kli sharis. Baskets of silver and gold could be kli sharis. The korban mincha of Sotah, however, is brought in this wooden kli, which cannot possibly be kli sharis. So the Gemara says this Mishnah does fit Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that you could make kli sharis out of wood. And the Gemara quotes a brisa. The kli sharis is made out of wood. Rabbi says it is possible. Rabbi Yehuda says that it's kosher. So Rabbi Yehuda, we wouldn't have an answer, because these kafifin are roy to be kli sharis, so we wouldn't be able to say we wouldn't understand what this Mishnah means. When it says it can't be kli sharis, it also doesn't make sense to say that it's not right to be kli sharis, because according to him it is. So Maran says, no, Rabbi Yehuda would also agree that these baskets are not roy to be kli sharis, because he only said you could use wood if it's chashav wood. However, this is not chashav wood, and you can't use non chashav things, like the pasuk clearly says, hakrivein ala pechasecha, question mark, would you bring these things to your own table? You can't bring them to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You can only use chashav things. The Gemara now begins explaining the Mishnah and all that it said about a general carbon mincha. So first of all, it said that he puts it in Kli Sharis and he is Mekadesh in the Kli Sharis. That implies that he has to intentionally be Mekadesh in the Kli Sharis. It's not automatically. So the Gemara says, no, it is automatic, but we should change the understanding here a bit. Instead of that he puts it in Kli Sharis to be Mekadesh, it's that he puts it in a Kli Sharis and it becomes Kodesh. In order to be Mekadesh, he puts in the Kli Sharis. Not that he's Mekadesh in the Kli Sharis, but the way he's Mekadesh is by putting the Kli Sharis with Kavanah, without Kavanah. Now, then he puts on it oil and Lavona. Where do you see that he puts on the oil and the Lavona, like it says, V'yitzikol Hashemen, V'nasal Lavona, and only afterwards he take it to the Kohen, as it says, V'hevia al bnei Aaron. And the Kohen brings it to the Mizbeach, like it says afterwards, V'higish esel ha-Mizbeach. Now, we said it brings it to the southwestern corner. Where do we get that from? So Gemara brings a number of approaches here. So the Gemara says, it says, V'zos Taras HaMincha, that's referring to all Menachos, HaKrevos Bnei Aaron, Lifnei Hashem. We should bring it Lifnei Hashem. Lifnei Hashem refers to the west side of the Mizbeach, because that is the side facing the Heichel, closest to the Kodesh HaKodashim. We have a different brayso that says Lifnei Hashem. You might think that it's on the west side, but it says L'pnei HaMizbeach, the face of the Mizbeach, which is the southern side, which is where the ramp is. So you might think, therefore, that it's supposed to be only on the southern side, but it says Lifnei Hashem, and therefore you have to have both south and west, which means you put it in the western corner by the horn of the Mizbeach, and then that is enough. That is sufficient. That solves all the requirements. The Gemara now quotes Rabbi Elazar, who learns it slightly differently. He says, if you have where the Torah tells you to put it on Pnei Mizbeach and Lifnei Hashem, so you have south and west, you may think it's giving you two options. You could do either to the south or to the west, whichever one you want is fine. How do you know that? It means to tell you should put it on the corner, literally on the edge of the corner of the south and the north. So he says, because whenever you have two psukim and one contradicts the other, and if there's one that fits with the other and the other that doesn't fit with the first, you always go with the one that fits with the other. You try to resolve that you're not losing any of them, you're being Mekayim the two of them. So how does that work? So by putting it on the southern edge, slightly off the corner, you're still being Mekayim both psukim. Why? It's still Pnei HaMizbeach because it's on the southern edge. And it's still west, it's still Lifnei Hashem, because he holds that the Mizbeach was all in the northern half of the Azara, and therefore the southern edge of the Mizbeach is facing directly to the center, to the due west, to where the Heichel is. And therefore, even though it's not mamish on the corner, it still counts as being Lifnei Hashem and El Pnei HaMizbeach at the same time. And therefore you are Mekayim all of them. That's what you need to do, and it doesn't therefore have to be on the corner mamish in order to be Mekayim both both west and south. Now, says Rav Ashi, we see here that the entire Mizbeach is in the north. Now, why does it say V'dayai? That Rav Ashi says